Welcome to the WINFL Show.
Welcome to the Outdoor Hebrides, and hello to all you sports fans out there. This is the WINFL Show. I'm your host, Ian McKinnon. I am joined by Mr. Patrick Jackson and Mr. Jake McGee. Patrick, how are you doing today?
I have done flower beds, my shoulders hurt, I've been to a beer festival, so I'm a little bit less sharp than my usual self, I think, but we'll make it through, we'll be alright.
That's absolutely shocking. That's all I can say about that. Absolutely shocking that is. Jake, how are you getting on? Guess what, Jake? Guess what? Storm Dave, which was supposed to obliterate us this weekend, appears to just have dissipated or changed course because it's not blowing 50 miles an hour outside, pouring with rain, with snow and hailstones all the time. We're getting some breaks. How are you doing, Jake?
Some breaks. It feels like a monsoon because, you open up your window and glorious sunshine, blue skies. You think, I might go for a walk. And then 15 minutes later, it's hailing and you're like, I'm glad I stayed indoors. So I'm not getting ahead of myself just yet because tomorrow night and Sunday morning is supposed to be pretty bad. And for someone who will be a bit worse for wear tomorrow night, a bit nervous about that bit.
Yeah, so are you going anywhere special in particular tomorrow night, Jake?
Just a classic rock night. You might have heard of it. You might have something to do with it.
I have. I will be performing at a classic rock night tomorrow in Stornoway. So looking forward to that one. Patrick, how's your music career going?
Yeah, we're good. We've got three gigs coming up in the summer that we're getting ready for. Starting some new to us, 1970s rock is what tends to be grabbed up by our lead guitarist. Lovely. It's all good fun. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. I would love to talk music with you guys for the next hour and a half to 2 hours, depending on how long this goes. But we're here to talk about the NFL. We have got our defensive Hall of Fame inductees. We did the offense last week. For anyone who hasn't listened, go and check that out on Spotify. We uploaded the entire thing to YouTube, so you can watch every single one of our offensive Hall of Fame inductees on there. But we're going to be talking about the defense this week. But before we do that, a couple of small pieces of news. Patrick Jackson, why don't you tell us the first piece of news that's been going on in and around the NFL this week?
Yes, the Las Vegas Raiders have signed Kirk Cousins to mentor Fernando Mendoza, I guess, and he's mentoring him at a fairly decent rate, $20 million fully guaranteed for next year, although the Raiders only pay 1.3 of that. The Falcons are picking up a big bunch of that tag. The contract also includes a 2-year, $80 million option that the Raiders can pick up if they want to cover the 27 and 28 seasons. So depending on the development of Mendoza, we'll see how long they keep Cousins around for, but that sounds an awful lot for a backup quarterback, so I am imagining they'll pass. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see who starts at the beginning of the season, because we saw for the Falcons towards the back end of last year that Cousins was getting back to some of his better ball. I think it took a long time to come back from that Achilles injury, but he was playing all right. So if that trajectory continues, this could be a good bridge for the Raiders to help ease in their rookie.
Yes. Now, Jake, I'm going to get your opinion on this because we obviously discussed this in our group chat when the news broke that the Raiders were signing Cousins. Mendoza's going first overall. I'm of the old school opinion that if you draft a quarterback first overall, he should be a week one starter because that's why you're doing it. That's why you're drafting this guy first overall. But give us your thoughts on this because I like signing Kirk Cousins as a backup, as a mentor. They're not picking up his full contract, as Patrick said. But Jake, what's your thoughts on this and the whole situation with the Raiders quarterback room going forward?
Yeah, I think part of it completely depends on what the Raiders' schedule looks like. In the ideal world, their schedule is now top heavy at the start of the year. They roll out Kirk Cousins, they help Mendoza. I'll come along and then say they have like a week 6 bye and their schedule softens and you roll out Mendoza and you give him the best possible opportunity. we don't know what's going to happen with the schedule. They might start off with easy games and the back end becomes difficult. You just don't know. But I, for one, think this is just another great move from the Raiders, another kind of off-season of the Raiders so far I've been really impressed with, because if you want Mendoza kind of senior, that is Kirk Cousins. Just two white guys with not much thoughts up here, but they love to throw the ball. So I think they'll get on like a house on fire. Hopefully, I think Cousins is kind of reaching that part of his career where he's realizing, thanks to the Falcons' kind of rude awakening of drafting Penix after giving him a boatload of money, he's kind of realizing he's at that part of his career where he's here to kind of be the bridge quarterback, like Patrick said. So the fact that they're paying like $1.3 million this year to have a really kind of good leader, good veteran presence for a young rookie quarterback, I think it's fantastic. And you're picking number one overall because you suck. You don't want to be picking, ideally, in the top 10 next year, because you want to have said we got it right this year. So don't break the young man's confidence, ease him in, no rush. And now you don't have to rush, because before that it was like, well, you've traded away Geno Smith. Not that that's a travesty, but the quarterback room was bare, so empty, they needed to bring someone in.
Yeah, I mean, what kind of situation are we thinking, guys? And I'll put it out to both of you here, because I understand we'll start Kirk Cousins and let Mendoza get some time. Now, we've seen this before. Well, we saw it for 3 years with Aaron Rodgers when he got drafted. Famously, Patrick Mahomes sat for an entire year. Where do we sit on this? Who the Raiders should start week 1 from a fan's point of view? Because obviously training camp means an awful lot. If Mendoza comes out and is just killing it and Kirk Cousins looks washed, they're probably going to start Mendoza. But you do run the risk of, and we've said this before, with rookie quarterbacks, you start them, they suck for 6 games, and then they get benched. So I'll chuck it out to both of you guys to give me your views on this. Personally, I think Mendoza should start week 1, but give me your thoughts.
I think you're right. There'll be a huge amount of pressure from the media and from fans to start him, and whoever gets that start, there'll be the pressure to make the switch as soon as possible. So, yeah, it sets you up in a difficult situation unless you're very clear about your intentions as the Raiders organization. And we often see your first overall pick being touted as, generational, change the game sort of product, in which case you'd expect them to be starting and making an impact straight away. And it's the positional value, I guess, that elevates Mendoza into that position, despite not being the player closest to the best in his position in the NFL in the draft. That's too many things. But I took a look back through the first overall pick quarterbacks, and the last one not to start his first game was Baker Mayfield for the notoriously well-run Browns. And all the way back to Troy Aikman in '89, 33% of one QBs haven't started 66 half. So it's uncommon that the guy doesn't start immediately.
And Jake, are you a fan of this sort of baptism of fire, shall we call it, for a first overall quarterback? Just, we draft him first overall because we think he's a guy. But then there's also the second school of thought, which is like, Mendoza might not be the guy, but he was the guy this year. And I'm not trying to put down on the boy at all. I'm really not. But it's a case of, well, he's the best this year, and we needed a quarterback, so maybe we can sit him and start Kirk Cousins, who we know is better, surely better than Geno.
Yeah, and I think it's very similar to last year, where QB1 is QB1 unless you're Dan Orlovsky and you're part of the same agency. There's been no doubt for a long time that Mendoza's going first, to the point where no one's really talking about him because you don't need to. It's not like, oh, how good is he? Is he number 1? We know he's going number 1, so he's being under-talked. Training camp, pre-season are going to be very important. Recently we've seen Bryce Young kind of first overall struggle, get benched, and normally that's, the nail in the coffin. But because he had an Andy Dalton there and a coaching staff like Dave Canales who believed in him, they kind of reintegrated him, didn't rush him back, and you've seen a completely different quarterback who's hopefully going to kind of grow strength to strength. And It depends, because if you have someone of the same kind of talent as Bryce Young, maybe that works. If you're thinking Mendoza's, Peyton Manning 2.0, where the first season you roll them out, same as Aikman, you roll them out and they have a pretty awful first year, but you're like, don't worry, we're going to stick with this guy.
Yeah.
It's just, we're talking about Troy Aikman and Peyton Manning there. We're talking about, Hall of Fame quarterbacks, and we're talking about 20, 30 years ago. There's patience in the NFL these days is minimal. And people are already talking about next year's draft and the quarterbacks in next year's draft.
Yeah.
So I think, me personally, I would absolutely love to just see Kirk Cousins come out for a few weeks. Like I say, I'm now hoping that the Raiders have like a week 4, week 5, like one of the really early buys, and you're thinking, right, that's where we make the move. If they have a really easy schedule, like a week 14 buy, maybe you start in week 1 because you're just like, when do we put him out? There needs to be a reason. If Kirk Cousins is 4-0, you don't really want to be pulling him out to be like, well, we have to see what the number 1 overall pick has. So
yeah, well, that is the other argument, Patrick. It's lovely to have the option to sit your guy. Everyone wants to be able to sit their rookie. You want that luxury of like, we've got the rookie, we don't know if he's any good or not, let's sit him, we've got a known commodity here. But if Kirk Cousins goes on a 6-game tear and they're 6-0, and then Mendoza's just kind of sitting there going, all right, okay, what's happening? And then they start thinking about, well, we don't need to start him at all. And what you don't like to see, and I don't think it's ever happened with a first overall quarterback, I'm sure someone can fact check this, is that they get drafted, sit, and then just never start. I don't think it's ever happened, but who's to say it couldn't happen? Because Kirk Cousins is not an old man. He is advanced years for a quarterback. But with today's, modern technology and medicine, there's nothing to say Kirk Cousins can't play another 3 years in this NFL. Patrick, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, of the guys I looked at, the longest wait was the Carson Palmer, who was game 1 of his second season was when he got his first start, but no one disappeared completely. And yeah, I think in the scenario that they're 6-0, you won't have the fan pressure or the media pressure. Then they'll just be happy to be winning. So that puts you in a good position, I guess, as an organisation, that you can bring him in as and when you want, and it sets you up with a super expensive backup. But so long as your QB1 and QB2 amount to a reasonable amount, then I guess it's a fine situation to be in. You can work it to your own intent.
Absolutely. Now, Jake, it wasn't just the Kirk Cousins. That's not the only piece of news that we had this week. Didn't have a lot. It's pretty quiet. But it wasn't the only piece of news. Jake McGee, what else has been going on?
Yeah, we did have a bit of defensive news, and a former Defensive Player of the Year announcing his official retirement. Not played in the league since 2024, but we're talking about Stephon Gilmore, a former first-round pick himself, Super Bowl champion with the Patriots, 2-time All-Pro, 5-time Pro Bowler, was the co-interceptions leader back in 2019, a shutdown corner in an era of not many shutdown corners, and a lot of good wide receivers. So maybe it's one that kind of always flew under the radar, despite it. Again, you would think I may be a Panthers fan by my love for Bryce Young and the fact I'm going to say I was really glad that out of South Carolina, his 5th and final Pro Bowl was with his hometown Carolina Panthers. So I think he had a really good career. Whether we're talking about him in 5+ years about the certain gold jacket, I'm not so sure. But, a Defensive Player of the Year at corner is nothing to sniff at.
Patrick Jackson, Stephon Gilmore, he did have a really good career and was one of the most solid, most dependable cornerbacks in the NFL for quite a while. What's your take?
Yeah, I think his career tailed off a bit towards the end as happens, and it's not a surprise to hear this announcement now, I don't think. But yeah, at his peak, he was a lockdown corner and a terror, and it helped his sides immensely. So yeah, he'll be missed around locker rooms, I guess, as that veteran presence. But not a surprise to see this come now with the way his play petered off.
And we might not be talking about him in 5 years' time for the gold jacket, Jake, but we might definitely be talking about him in 5 years' time for the WINFL Hall of Fame. the only Hall of Fame that actually matters when it comes to American football. The only one that is based on common sense, and the only one where twice in the last 2 weeks, at least one of us has completely forgotten about someone really important, or has just remembered that, hey, this guy's totally ineligible, but let's just bang him in anyway. It happens.
Turns out it's harder than you think.
It's actually quite difficult. So, gentlemen, we're going to move on because our next segment is, of course, the inductions for the first year or inaugural year of the WINFL Hall of Fame. And this week we're doing the defense, did the offense last week, as I already mentioned. And we are starting on the defensive line with defensive tackles. Now, when we did this, for those at home, defensive tackles is essentially interior defensive linemen, because some teams play with a nose tackle. Some people play with 2 defensive tackles. Some teams used to have 5 defensive linemen. That was a thing. And I go, whoa, hang on a second. So they had 3 defensive tackles. But we're starting with the defensive tackles. And our very first induction into the WINFL Hall of Fame is Joe Green. Mean Joe Green. 13 seasons, 10 Pro Bowls, 4 All-Pro seasons, 4 times Super Bowl champion. He was the 1969 Defensive Rookie of the Year, a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year, made the All-1970s team. He played 181 games. He tallied, unofficially, but he tallied 77.5 sacks. And before I go any further, I will say we're going to be giving some statistics for our defensive players. And it's much easier to rank offensive players by statistics. Running backs, wide receivers, quarterbacks, it's easier to do that. When it comes to defensive players, it's a lot more difficult because obviously statistics don't tell the whole story. For pretty much anyone who played pre-2000, tackles are barely a stat. They don't even exist. So it's very difficult to do it statistic-wise. But I'm just going to talk about a few stats here. But Mean Joe Green, Jake McGee, I mean, an absolute stalwart on that steel curtain. And a lot of people forget that the steel curtain was the defensive line. It was the 4 defensive linemen of those Pittsburgh Steelers, 4 Super Bowls in the 70s. What can you say?
Yeah, it should be no surprise to kind of anybody here that Mean Joe goes first. I mean, maybe, not the scariest nickname or the most creative nickname, but it's aptly deserved because that man was just a beast in the middle. And it's one of those where you just pray. If you're a quarterback, the old cliche, they hate the pressure up the middle. Well, there was plenty of pressure up the middle when Mean Joe was there.
There certainly was. Patrick Jackson, Mean Joe Green. We're going to be talking a lot about players from the 1970s. The 1970s comes up a lot when you talk about the greatest defenses of all time. And the steel curtain and that Pittsburgh Steelers team of the 70s, 4 Super Bowls in 6 years. What about it?
It was a very tough era with a very tough sport, and somehow the Steelers stood out as a tough team in that era. And Joe Green stood out as a super tough guy on a tough team in a tough era. So I think that's what really elevates him to this status, is just that impression was really had by his peers, judging by the number of All-Pros he was elevated to as well. He was a menace on the field and someone you would absolutely be delighted to have on your team.
Definitely. Mean Joe Green, my goodness. Okay, so for the next player nomination, we're going to hand over to Jake McGee. Jake, who was the next player elected into the WINFL Hall of Fame.
Absolutely. So we're going to start with second place, Alan Page, a 9-time Pro Bowler, a 5-time All-Pro. He was the 1971 MVP, part of the All-1970s decade team also. 148.5 sacks unofficially, 3 safeties, 2 interceptions, part of the Purple People Eaters. He was the first defensive MVP, and only a player that we'll bring up later on has done it since. Only one player on the defense has done it since. He is also a former Minnesota Supreme Court judge, and has the Presidential Medal of Freedom. So Alan Page has lived a life.
Patrick, Alan Page was pretty decent. He's like, we spoke about the Steelers. You're going to hear a lot of nicknames as well. For those of you watching and those of you listening at home, you're going to hear an awful lot of nicknames. Not just like, units and stuff, but, players as well. We've had Mean Joe Green, the Steel Curtain, the Purple People Eaters. The 70s was a defining era, Patrick, for defensive players. It really was. And Alan Page was amongst the best who ever did it. What do you think?
Yeah, and I guess the only blemish on his copybook is retiring with the Bears, and that must have been a little bit of a sting when he moved there in, what was it, the 78 season. So, yeah, and still putting up good sack numbers those last 4 years with the Bears as well, still around the 10s, 148.5 total. Led the lead in fumble recoveries one season as well, so he's racking up the accolades, and yeah, to stand out on a team with that magnitude for that era is very impressive.
Just absolutely phenomenal. So we're going to move on to our next selection. Patrick Jackson, take it away. Who is our next selection?
The next selection is Mr. Randy White, 14 years a Dallas Cowboy, which, fills me with a little bit of sick, but that's not his fault. 7 All-Pro teams, 9 Pro Bowls, Super Bowl champion, Super Bowl MVP, Hall of Fame, All 1980s team, 1978 Defensive Player of the Year. What a phenomenal player. 111 sacks across his career, and just a very, very disruptive player helping his side to that Super Bowl.
Yeah, and Jake, Randy White, last week we'd voted on Larry Allen in the offensive line and said who might be like the strongest offensive lineman of all time. Randy White might be the strongest defensive player of all time. I remember watching, I think it was one of the America's Game with the Dallas Cowboys, and Hollywood Henderson talking about Randy White, grabbing him by the collar and lifting him up with one hand and telling him to get his act together. Like, oh, come on. This guy, Randy White, was a menace, an absolute menace, and a legend of the game. Jake McGee.
Yeah, the monster. And, we're talking a lot here about Pro Bowls, and this is when Pro Bowls meant something. In 10 years' time, when we're doing the WINFL Hall of Fame or inducting people from, the modern era, Pro Bowls becomes, a lot less meaningful. But back here, you had to be a good player to get these Pro Bowls, and these All-Pros, they meant something. You earned it.
You absolutely earned it. So that's not a bad trio of players to kick us off. We're going to move on to our next selection. 15 seasons, 14 Pro Bowls, 5-time All-Pro, all 1960s team, all 1970s team. It's Merlin Olsen. The guy was just an absolute demon on the defensive line. He played in 208 games. He generated 91 sacks, one of the scariest just defensive tackles of all time. Merlin Olsen practically redefined the position in the 1960s. Jake, what can you say about this guy? He was just, when we talk about the greatest players of all time at any position, Merlin Olsen always comes up in the defensive tackles.
Yeah, and he was terrifying coming out of college. And the fact that this was when the NFL and the AFL had merged, so he was drafted 3rd overall in the NFL and 2nd overall in the AFL. So people knew right from the outset that this man was going to be a problem, and he lived up to it.
Patrick, only 1 year he didn't make the Pro Bowl in this entire career. What do you think of that?
Yeah, his very last one. 6'5", 270 pound in the 60s, absolute juggernaut. It's in his rookie career as well, so had decent hands. There's something to be said for 14 consecutive Pro Bowls and a 15-year season, and he played every game in his final year as well. So he had the ruggedness to go with the size, and that was just an overall impressive career.
Yeah, not a stretch to say Merlin Olsen was no slouch, shall we say. Jake McGee, who's the next guy in our list for the WINFL Hall of Fame?
Yeah, we have Mr. Cowboy, Bob Lilly. 11-time Pro Bowler, 7-time All-Pro, a Super Bowl champ with the Cowboys, a member of the 1960s and 1970s All-Decade team, 18 fumble recoveries, an interception, 4 touchdowns, part of the Doomsday Defense, and most notoriously probably known for his 29-yard sack on Bob Greasy in Super Bowl VI. And had to bring it up because check off another episode where we mentioned Bob Greasy.
Yeah, I mean, Bob Lilly, so I mean, that Dallas defense, like, are you kidding me? Like, seriously, are you kidding me? So we've got 2 Dallas players, 2 Dallas defensive tackles in the Hall of Fame in the very first induction. Patrick Jackson, what?
It gives me no joy to do it, but you've got to be honest about it when you're making these appraisals. You can't let your team biases get in the way of acknowledging the greatness this guy was playing. To have the nickname Mr. Cowboy, given the history of that franchise, said a lot.
Definitely. Absolutely. So next up on our list, Patrick Jackson. Who's the next guy inducted into the Hall of Fame?
We are in the closest to the modern era we've got with any of our defensive tackles. It's Warren Sapp, a guy who was just devastating the league when I was first watching the game back in the mid-90s. And 13 seasons for Tampa, 4 All-Pros, 7 Pro Bowls, Super Bowl champion, all 1990s team, Defensive Player of the Year in 1999, all 2000s team as well, just to cap it off. 96.5 career sacks, and a guy who you just watch him play and make big athletes look like children. And just a phenomenal player.
Yeah, Jake, it's not often when you see, because we always remember big offensive lines from the 1990s, the Cowboys, the Redskins, as they were at the time. They're big, beef offensive linemen. And then in the late 90s and into the 2000s, Warren Sapp was throwing these guys around. And that Buccaneers defense of 2001, no, I've got the year wrong. When you know the one I mean, the one that won the Super Bowl. Yeah, that Bucs team. I mean, that defense is one of the greatest of all time. Warren Sapp was a huge part of that. Jake McGee, really, what a player Sapp was.
Yeah, and he's split opinion from the very start. Even from his draft day, there was split opinions and drama, but there was no kind of denying the man mountain on the field and his play on the field. Maybe as his post-football life, or even maybe his pre-football life, there's some questions, but on the field, an absolute unit. And like I say, that Buccaneers defense was terrifying.
It certainly was, my goodness. That wraps up our defensive tackles. We're now going to move to defensive end. And we start with a man who played 16 seasons, -1. He retired and then came back again. In 16 seasons, or 15 years of playing, he made 13 Pro Bowls. He made 8 first-team All-Pros, 5 second-team All-Pros. He was a one-time Super Bowl champ, 2-time Defensive Player of the Year, made the All-1980s team, made the All-1990s team. Ended his career with 232 games, 192 sacks. It is, of course, the man, the myth, the legend, the Minister of Defense himself, Mr. Reggie White. Jake McGee, arguably one of the nicest defensive players of all time, but one of the most effective. He was an absolute beast. And, at the beginning of his career, the USFL was going on. He was one of those guys. But what can you say? You literally cannot talk about pass rushers without talking about Reggie White. And of course, possibly, you could say the most influential and important free agent signing of all time when he went from Philadelphia to the Green Bay Packers. Jake, take it away.
Yeah, I didn't ask, but I can only assume this was unanimous. It was certainly the first name I written down. I didn't even need to take much thought when it comes to defensive end with some of the names on this list. led the NFL in sacks 2 years, did it 2 years in a row. Most consecutive seasons with 10 plus sacks, with 9 of those seasons. Most seasons with 15 or more sacks, with 5 of those, still leading those categories all these years later. I mean, he is the kind of standard, and players today, when you'll see, we'll watch the draft in a few weeks, they'll still, compare people, like, could he be Reggie White? No, he's never going to be Reggie White. I'll stop you right there when you're talking about a new prospect, because there is only one Reggie White.
Yeah, and Patrick, we talk about defensive players today. Well, they're called edge rushers now. You have outside linebackers, defensive ends. They swap positions, they swap sides, they run around, they stunt, they do all this and that. Reggie White did all of this from a single 3-point stance. Never changed it. You knew where he was the entire time. He just came at you and he killed you. What else can you say about this guy?
Yeah, an agonising 2 sacks short of his 200, but what a phenomenal career. And to be in the running for Defensive Player of the Year so consistently throughout your career. He only missed out on Defensive Rookie of the Year by a few votes as well. He was second in that. So just phenomenal consistency for, 15 years, as you say, with the year retired and then coming back for that random year in Carolina. A phenomenal player, absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, just one of the greatest of all time, the great Reggie White. Who's next on our list? Jake.
Bruce Smith, another name that should not shock anyone here. 11 times a Pro Bowler, 8 times an All-Pro, part of the 1980s and 1990s All-Decade team, a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year in his own right, most career sacks with the 200. He hit the big 200. Most seasons with a sack, 19 seasons he had with a sack, and the most seasons with 10 or more sacks, and he had 13 of those. I mean, just the model of consistency.
Yeah, Patrick, Bruce Smith was pretty good. He was pretty good for 2 decades. I mean, my goodness. So consistent, as Jake says. But at his peak, he was an absolute terror to opposing offenses. Bruce Smith was one of the reasons that the Bills in the 1990 season came so close to winning the Super Bowl 25, when he got Jeff Hostetler for the safety. Could very well have been a defensive touchdown, gone for the safety in the Super Bowl. But I mean, Bruce Smith, it seemed like he was never going to retire, didn't it?
Yeah, Tony Baselli said Bruce Smith was the hardest guy he ever had to face off against when he was talking about his Hall of Fame induction. So, yeah, obviously, given the ranks of players he will have faced throughout his career, that is an indictment of just how good and how tough he was to block as an offensive lineman, and very few successfully managed it, judging by the sack numbers.
Yeah, and I know you guys are probably aware of the, what do they call it? Is it the sack? What is it? The pass rush school that gets run every year. I think Von Miller's was one of the first guys who started it, and J.J. Watt was involved in it. But all the pass rushers come together and talk about how can we kill quarterbacks. And the guys that they talk about the most are guys like Bruce Smith and Reggie White. It's like, watch this guy's film. That's how you beat a left tackle. This is how you stunt inside on the guard. That's how you change. And, as you say, I mean, Reggie White and Bruce Smith, it's decades ago. It's not like they retired 3 years ago. It's decades ago, and they're still the absolute gold standard. But we're going to move on to the next player, Patrick Jackson, who is the next defensive end in our list.
Third in the class, we have Deacon Jones, 11 years of Ram, 3 years of Charger. So if he'd been playing in this era, he wouldn't even have to move house. Finished his career with Washington, and during that time made 5 All-Pro teams, 8 Pro Bowls. He was in the All-1960s team, 173.5 career sacks. A menace, particularly in like a middle region of his career, 65 to 70, he was up in the 20 sacks, 3 seasons above 15 for 6 consecutive seasons. Just a real disruptive force.
Jake, the man who coined the term sacking the quarterback, Deacon Jones, one of the original guys, superstars on the defensive line. I mean, just what a player.
Yeah, we've had the Minister of Defence. Now we get the Secretary of Defence, and someone who's been coined, the most valuable Ram of all time. Which, when you look back of all the players that have played for the LA, St. Louis Rams, that's a pretty big deal. And like you say, revolutionized the game. And these years where he was getting 20 plus sacks, 22 sacks in 14 games, bit different than doing it in 17, 18 plus games. So he was doing it way before it was cool to be doing it.
He certainly was. Now, the next guy on our list might be a slight surprise to some people. Now, there was a lot more contention between the defensive players than was with the offensive players. But the next guy on our list is the most recent guy on our list. It's Michael Strahan. 15 seasons, 7 Pro Bowls, 4 All-Pro seasons, one-time Super Bowl champion. He was the 2001 Defensive Player of the Year, made the All-2000s team. He's had 141.5 sacks in his career. Michael Strahan was actually one of the few players, and I know this sounds ridiculous, but apart from the 3 that we'd already mentioned, to actually make all 3 lists. Michael Strahan. This was a very contentious list, finding the greatest defensive ends of all time. But he was phenomenal. He was a huge part of that Giants team. One of the main reasons that they beat the Patriots in the Super Bowl, as we all know. Jake McGee, I'll hand it over to you first. He had a phenomenal career. He's now doing the television. He was better as a player than he is on television, in my opinion. But it's not to say he's not good on television. He was just better as a player. Michael Strahan, I think, a worthy addition to our list. What do you think?
Yeah, and he set himself a high bar. So if he was better on TV, he would be, doing very, very well. He would be on our screen constantly. But that 2001 year, I mean, just unbelievable. I mean, Defensive Player of the Year, sack leader, forced fumbles co-leader. In 2001, he was unstoppable. And you have to love when, we've had nicknames for players, for teams, but Michael Strahan has a look. And when you put up a lineup of players, you know which one's Michael Strahan.
Yeah, you're not gonna mistake him in a lineup anytime soon, are you, Patrick?
No, absolutely not. And led the league in tackles for loss 3 times, in sacks twice, in forced fumbles once. It was a multifaceted career as well as a one where quarterbacks were filled with dread on a regular basis.
Who's the next player on our list, Jake?
We've got Julius Peppers. Again, a relatively recent addition to the Hall of Fame. 9-time Pro Bowler, 3-time All-Pro. Another man who was part of multiple all-decade teams, the 2000 and 2010s team. He was the Defensive Rookie of the Year, had 159.5 sacks, 51 forced fumbles, 11 interceptions, and even totted up 6 defensive touchdowns.
Patrick, 11 interceptions for a defensive end. That's all right. I mean, what? There are cornerbacks who are being talked about as the best of all time who don't have 11 career interceptions. It's a defensive end here. Just a phenomenal player, Patrick.
I mean, 266 games, 240 starts helps your chances of things popping into your hands now and again, but you can't argue with the longevity, and the fact that he managed 10 plus sack seasons in that time was incredibly impressive. And I think longevity helps your Hall of Fame argument when you're just looking at how much of you overall contributed throughout your career. It's not all about having concentrated high numbers for a small number of years. So to be able to tally up 160 and be performing at such a high level for so long makes him a worthy nominee, I think.
Well, yeah, we mentioned this last week when we talked about the offensive players, and we said, The best ability is availability, and it really is. Because, yeah, you can have a sort of Gale Sayers type career where you play for 5 years and you're phenomenal. But you can also get that career where you play for 20 years and you're really good for 20 years. And then you think, well, the guy who was great for 5 years, they won one Super Bowl, or maybe didn't even make a Super Bowl. The guy that for 20 years made 3 or 4, 1, 2, or 3. And that's the thing when you have longevity like that. And someone like Peppers is just, kind of like Bruce Smith, it's like, is this guy ever going to stop playing? Like, serious, when are you going to retire? You just know that there was offensive linemen going, are you ever going to retire come week 1? Patrick Jackson, who's next on our list?
We finished the defensive ends with another Viking, predominantly anyway. Chris Dolman started first 9 years of his career with the Vikings from 85 to 93, then a little stint in Atlanta, and finished off retiring with the Vikings. During that time, he was in the All-Pro team twice. He made 8 Pro Bowls, All 1990s team, 1992 Defensive Player of the Year. Ended his career with 150.5 sacks, and just another one of those sort of players who managed to maintain performance levels for good 15 seasons. Even in his final year, he had 8 sacks, so still productive, even at the age of 38.
Jake, Chris Dolman is one of the scariest players I've ever seen. He looked, even when he was sitting on the sidelines, just sitting on the bench, he looked absolutely terrifying. He was like one of those guys like Lawrence Taylor or somebody like that, where you look at them and you're like, he scares me. Like Reggie White looked like the kind of guy you'd like to go out and have a beer with. You're like, he looks like a delight to have over for dinner. Chris Dolman was terrifying. He was unbelievable and a great addition to our list. Jake, what do you think?
Yeah, he's definitely someone you send off the bus first. I mean, looking at this list, you're thinking there's a competition to get off the bus first, but he would fight tooth and nail to be there. And, he was part of the 1990s All-Decade team. Well, 2 of his All-Pros were in the 80s. His sack leader was in 89, so he probably had a good case if he would come out a little bit earlier to be part of the 80s team as well. So just a phenomenal player, but like you say, terrifying.
Oh, you looked at him and went, no thanks, don't want anything to do with that. We're going to move on. That rounds up our defensive ends. We're now going to move on to our linebackers. And we split the linebackers, like we did the defensive linemen, into interior and outside. The first guy in our interior linebackers is no surprise to anyone. He only played 9 seasons, one of the shortest careers of all the guys that we've got on our list. 9 seasons. In that time, he made 8 Pro Bowls, 5-time All-Pro. He was part of the All-1960s team and the All-1970s team. I'd like to point out he only played 9 seasons, and yet he was part of 2 All-Decade teams. 119 games, 11 sacks, 22 interceptions. It's Dick Butkus. This man has an award named after him. The Butkus Award, which is originally awarded to the best college linebacker. It now has 3 categories. The Butkus Award is now awarded to the best college linebacker, the best high school linebacker, and the best professional linebacker in the country. When you think linebacker, you think Dick Butkus. Jake McGee, there's nothing else to be said. This man had to be in the first class for the Hall of Fame. Dick Butkus, take it away.
Yeah, the absolute gold standard. Like I say, when there's an award named after you, you are probably pretty good at the football. And he was Illinois through and through. His number was retired for Illinois. His number is rightly retired for Chicago, who played in Illinois. So a real kind of hometown hero. But yeah, this is no surprise to anyone, I'm sure.
Yeah, and Patrick, as I was saying, 2 all-decade teams, despite the fact he played 4 years in one decade, 5 in another. I mean, come on. What a player Dick Butkus was.
Yeah, phenomenal. And I was surprised when I came to it and saw his playing career was so short, because it's such a synonymous name within the game. You think that's a guy who must have played like 15 years to have left that big of a mark. But no, he did it in 9. And yeah, I think the impression that he's left on the game means that he deserves to be in any Hall of Fame class.
Yeah, it would be the equivalent of the best wide receiver in the country at high school, college, and pro level being called the Calvin Johnson Award. That would be the equivalent. And like, no one would ever think that. Everyone think that would be the Jerry Rice Award. Because he played for 20 years. 9 years. It's unbelievable. But we can't talk about Dick Butkus his entire time. I'm sure if Ben Isaacs is listening, he'd be like, absolutely we can. No, we can't. Stop it, Ben. We're going to move on. Jake, who's our next interior linebacker?
Yes, we've got Mike Singletary, Samurai Mike. 10 Pro Bowlers, 7-time All-Pro, Super Bowl champion, part of the All-1980s decade team. He was a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year, the 1990 Walter Payton Man of the Year, the 1988 Alan Page Award. He totaled up 1,488 tackles, 7 interceptions, 12 fumble recoveries, and 19 sacks. A very, very intense man. And a much better player than coach.
Well, I'm sure Vernon Davis would agree with you on that one. Patrick, Singletary sometimes gets forgotten about when people talk about the greatest defensive players of all time. But the reality is he was. He was one of the greatest who ever did it. But there was a little bit of overshadowing. It's the same in when people talk about, the Pittsburgh Steelers of the 70s and the Dallas Cowboys of the 70s. Bob Lilly might not get as much hype as he should because of someone like Randy White. This happens. Because of someone like Richard Dent, Singletary might not get mentioned. But Singletary is one of the greatest to ever do it at his position. And as anyone who played against him, I've heard the quote about a dozen times, we'll see, they would look up before the ball snapped and they'd just see these eyes, these massive eyes staring across at them and going, oh, there's no way I can beat this guy. Patrick Jackson, Mike Singletary, what a player he was.
Yeah, I think 10 consecutive Pro Bowls, 8 consecutive All-Pro teams really speaks for itself. A couple of Defensive Player of the Year awards on top of that. He was a guy who was extremely well recognised as excellent by his peers, and why wouldn't you, looking at the way he played?
Oh, just something else. We're going to move on now. Patrick Jackson, who is the next player on our list?
We have, at number 3, a guy who played 14 seasons for Tampa. It's Derek Brooks. 5 All-Pro seasons, 11 Pro Bowls, Super Bowl champion, All 2000s team, 2002 Defensive Player of the Year, 2000 Walter Payton Man of the Year, 2003 Alan Page Award. It's backing up very similarly to the previous nominee. Just such a phenomenal career for so many years. 1,300 career solo tackles, 1,713 combined. Really, really consistent player in a Tampa D that was pretty well regarded in some of that era.
Yeah, and Jake, much like Warren Sapp, Derek Brooks gets thought about for like 1 year. They're like, oh yeah, that year the Bucs won the Super Bowl. They had a really good defense. It wasn't just 1 year. This guy did it for so long at such a high level, and he's absolutely deserving to be in a Hall of Fame. Jake McGee, what do you think?
Yeah, the late 90s and very early noughties, he was just phenomenal. An absolute monster. And I'm loving with these inside linebackers. We're seeing people stay in state as well. Went to Florida, goes to the Bucs. We love loyalty, and we love kind of when these things happen. You don't love it when you're playing the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, especially if you're playing them in the early 2000s.
Absolutely not. Good grief, they were terrifying. Now, we then move on to our next player on the list. 12 seasons. Sorry, beg your pardon, 11 seasons, 9 Pro Bowls, 6-time All-Pro, 4-time Super Bowl champion, 1974 Defensive Rookie of the Year, 1976 Defensive Player of the Year, All 70s team, All 80s team, 146 games, 23 and a half sacks, 28 interceptions, no teeth, Jack Lambert. Again, much like Chris Dolman, one of the scariest people ever. And one of the loudest people on the field, just screaming at quarterbacks before the ball was snapped. A huge reason that the Pittsburgh Steelers won those 4 Super Bowls. He's just one of the greatest linebackers of all time. He's one of the most famous linebackers of all time. Jake McGee, what else can you say about Jack Lambert?
Not an awful lot. And like you mentioned, we've seen the same kind of teams and the same kind of eras because these guys were just phenomenal and the stars aligned where they got drafted or they were signed by the same team. And when you combine the star power, good things happen. And Jack Lambert made things happen.
He certainly did. Yeah, Patrick, I mean, it was bad enough having, Joe Green and guys like that on the steel curtain. If you ever get past that defensive line of the Steelers, you then had Jack Lambert to deal with. Just a phenomenal player and era-defining. Again, another guy, he played for... what did I say? It was 10 seasons, was it? Beg your pardon. Yeah. He played for just 11 seasons and he made 2 all-decade teams. It really does show you how great Jack Lambert was.
Yeah, behind your big men, you need some berserks really taking people down at speed, and he did that on the regular for a decade. He was a really dangerous-looking player when you look back at those highlights.
Yeah, phenomenal. Jake McGee, who is the next player on our list?
Yeah, we have Ray Nitsky, and maybe someone who individually, when you look at his stats or his awards, massively underappreciated. Only made a Pro Bowl once, 2-time All-Pro, 2-time Super Bowl champion. But here's the kicker, he was a 5-time NFL champion because those 2 Super Bowls were Super Bowl I and Super Bowl II. Part of the all 1960s decade team, 25 interceptions, 2 touchdowns, and just part of that Packers team that destroyed the NFL in the 60s.
Yeah, Patrick, there's no way we could talk about linebackers and not have Ray Nitschke mentioned in this conversation as one of the greatest to ever do it. The man is just an absolute legend.
Yeah, founding father of the sport in many ways, and 7 rings if they were giving out rings back then. It's one of those guys that's just synonymous with the early NFL, and you can't pass him, I don't think.
No, absolutely not. Ray Nitschke was just, my God, he was phenomenal. He really was. Patrick Jackson, who is the final interior linebacker on our list.
And we end with another guy who has awards named after him. It's Randy Gradishar. He played 10 years for your Denver Broncos, making 2 All-Pros and 7 Pro Bowls in that time. He was Defensive Player of the Year in 78. And a player of his era who was head and shoulders above a lot of the competition. And that takes some doing and shows what a quality player you are.
Yeah, Jake. Now, a lot of people might not actually be that familiar with Randy Gradishar. He's a very, very underrated player. But this man literally kept Jack Lambert for getting 8 straight first-team All-Pros. Because Lambert was second-team All-Pro the 2 seasons that Gradishar got first-team All-Pro. And he was a phenomenal player, huge part of that Orange Crush defense that the Broncos had in 1977. But his style of play from Lambert was very different. He was a very quiet person. He didn't scream from the sidelines. He didn't scream across the line of scrimmage. He just told the other guys in the defense where to go. One of the most intelligent players who ever played the position. And Randy Gradishar, what do you make of him being on our list?
Yeah, another great defensive nickname he was a part of. But when you're an inside linebacker and you almost have as many sacks as interceptions, shows that he wasn't a one-dimensional player by any means. He was willing to get dirty, like say, willing to put others in positions to succeed. Kind of real kind of centerpiece for a defense, which you absolutely need. And without him, the Orange Crush might not have been named so aptly. So.
Well, I know it wouldn't, because when you think of, as an example, the Steel Curtain and Mean Joe Green, and you have Jack Lambert and guys like that, and then you think of the Doomsday Defence with Randy White and, Bob Lilly, and then you think of that, we'll talk about, the Dolphins, no-name defence, and they've got all these guys you talk about. When you think of the Orange Crush, there's one guy, really, that you think of, it's Randy Gradisher, because he was the defense. Everything went through him, and he single-handedly stopped opposing teams. He was a phenomenal player, often overlooked, but a worthy addition to our Hall of Fame. But we're going to move on now to outside linebacker. Now, our first player will be no surprise to anyone. He played 13 seasons. He made 10 Pro Bowls, 8 All-Pros. He was first or second team All-Pro in each of the first 10 years of his career, 2-time Super Bowl champion, 1981 Defensive Rookie of the Year, 3-time Defensive Player of the Year, the 1986 MVP, all 1980s teams. It is, of course, the original LT. Sorry, Londanian. It is Lawrence Taylor. 184 games played, 142 sacks, 9 interceptions, 41 forced fumbles. His 1981 and 82 seasons, that was his first and second years in the league, saw him win back-to-back Defensive Player of the Year awards and first-team All-Pros, as well as Defensive Rookie of the Year. This guy is arguably the most dominant player at any position in the history of the NFL. Jake McGee, I'll hand it over to you first. I don't think there is anything else you can say about Lawrence Taylor, but if I missed it out, please feel free.
Yeah, teased it with Alan Page that, the first defensive MVP, and only Lawrence Taylor has done it since. And, we've talked about intensity, and you'll struggle to find someone who played with as much intensity for Lawrence Taylor for reasons. But that man was frightening, and also had some fantastic sound bites. I mean, the crazed dogs. Whenever I was watching, the NFL top 10s or the NFL films, and that phrase came out, always got a chuckle out of me. So not someone you want to see on the opposing sideline.
Oh no, and Patrick, the Sound FX NFL clips on YouTube. You go on and just look up Lawrence Taylor, and I don't know who he's screaming at. It sounds like he's a shula. As one of them says, "Hey, you better hope I don't get back in there, or I'm gonna kick your bleeping bleep." He was just a phenomenal player for reasons as well that Jake said the intensity was there. We can't go into those reasons. But he is generally considered to be arguably the greatest defensive player, regardless of position of all time. And it's for a very good reason, Patrick, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Well, Tom Brady's worst nightmare, and therefore our best friend. He's, he was a figurehead of the league for a decade, and a guy who just personified the devastating as you needed to be a successful linebacker. The thing that underlines it the most, you type an L into Pro Football Reference, you play a number 2. You only need the L, you've got Lawrence Taylor.
Yeah, I mean, both Bill Parcells and Bill Belichick said, there's Lawrence Taylor and there's everyone else. Because that's how good he was. And he was just utterly, utterly phenomenal. Jake McGee, who is the next guy on our list of outside linebackers for the WINFL Hall of Fame?
Yeah, we have Kevin Green, a 5-time Pro Bowler, 2-time All-Pro, a member of the All-1990s Decade Team, 160 sacks, 23 forced fumbles, 26 fumbles recovered, 3 touchdowns, twice a sack leader, a WCW wrestler, and a fantastic coach as well. So it really has kind of taken his career here, there, and everywhere, came back to football as a coach, and seemingly was pretty damn good at doing that too.
Yeah, and Patrick, Kevin Green, when you saw him in civvies, he looked like a muscled beach bum. He had a long blonde hair. He always had a smile on his face. And then you put him in pads and a helmet, and you put him on the other side, of the line of scrimmage. You're like, oh my goodness, look at this guy. I mean, when I think of Kevin Green, I think of him as a Ram, but obviously so many people can just associate him with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Just one of the greatest to ever do it. Patrick Jackson, Kevin Green.
Yeah, I had no idea he'd been a wrestler as well, so that's something for me to look up after the show. He was a guy who, it was coming towards the end of his career when I started watching, I guess. I started in like mid to late 90s. But that was when he was picking up his Pro Bowls and his All Pros. So he was at the height of his career at that time. And he was a guy who you saw regularly on the highlight shows taking people's heads off. And, that's an era of the sport where the big hits were all the rage, right?
Yeah, and he was one of those guys, again, who would wander around the sidelines just screaming at people. But when you saw him in interviews, you're like, he's nothing like that. I think that's what JJ McCarthy's aiming for. You know what I mean? He's like, there's JJ McCarthy, and then there's 9, the game day guy. Like, it's not working, JJ. Just stop doing that, okay? You're not Kevin Green.
Be good with one of your personas first.
Yeah, just stop it, okay? Kevin Green was utterly, utterly amazing. Patrick Jackson, who is the next guy on our list?
Well, with all apologies to you, we have to go to Kansas City for Derek Thomas, 11 years a Chief. During that time, made 2 All-Pros, 9 Pro Bowls, 1989 Defensive Rookie of the Year, 1993 Walter Payton Man of the Year, 1994 Alan Page Award, or 1990s team for his 126.5 sacks. A very consistent player throughout the 90s, and a guy who led the league in sacks in his second season, led the league in forced fumbles in 92. So, as I say, very consistent decade, and one that I'm sure Broncos fans look back on with a bit of trepidation.
Not as much as Seahawks fans do, because they were part of the AFC West back then. Derek Thomas
yes, of course.
Derek Thomas is phenomenal, but Jake, Derek Thomas, all-time sack record holder, 7 in a single game against Seattle, should have been 8, but Dave Craigs greased himself up in that final play of the game. And then, of course, he also holds the record for the second most sacks in a game with 6. Tragically, his life was cut short. Derek Thomas was just unbelievable. And another guy who was 3-point stance as an outside linebacker, 3-point stance every single play. I'm coming after the quarterback. And just one of the greatest that we have ever seen. Jake, what else can you say about Derek Thomas?
Well, you have to be a heck of a player to play under Marty Schottenheimer and basically refuse to practice, because you're like, I don't need to practice, because come Sunday, I'm going to get 6 or 7 sacks. And you're thinking, well, if you don't get a couple of sacks and you've not give anything during practice, you're probably not going to be on the team very long. But guess what? DT was on the team for quite a while because he didn't need to practice. He just rocked up on a Sunday, sacked quarterbacks for fun, and then went home.
Yeah, I think it was one of the interviews with Marty Schottenheimer where he's talking about that. And it's not quite the LT being asleep in the team meetings, which everyone's heard about. But Derek Thomas would clearly not be paying attention to meetings if he turned up at all. And then Marty Schottenheimer says, what are you going to do in this play? And he's like, I'm going to kill the quarterback. That'll do. What else? I've got one job. It's like if you had a kicker at team meetings, right? What are you going to do in this play? I'm going to kick the ball through the uprights, coach. What else do you expect me to do? That's it. That's my job. But Derek Thomas did what he set out to do. Probably more, successful than most kickers. There you go. Derek Thomas was absolutely phenomenal. Worthy addition to our Hall of Fame. Now, our next guy, 12 seasons, 9 Pro Bowls, 4-time All-Pro, 1-time Super Bowl champion, all 2000s team, played for the Cowboys, played for the Broncos. It's DeMarcus Ware. 178 games, 138.5 sacks. I'll say that again. 178 games, 138.5 sacks, 3 interceptions, 35 forced fumbles. DeMarcus Ware was a game wrecker, absolute game wrecker, and one of the big reasons that 2015 Broncos team, the no-fly zone, won the Super Bowl. If it hadn't been for Ware, they would absolutely, I can categorically say, they would not have been there. Jake McGee, what a career this man had.
Yeah, and if Jerry Jones could go back, he would never let him leave the building because he was the franchise leader of sacks for the Cowboys when he left. And like you say, it's not like his career dropped off like the Cowboys would have been hoping. He went on to win a Super Bowl, so worked out pretty well for him. You know, a 2-time Butkus Award as a pro as well. So, you know, that'll keep coming up, but he was just phenomenal. Like you said, I'm glad where you look now, where you see some players at the end of the career and you think, go get a ring. And he went and got himself a ring because he wouldn't have got one on the Cowboys.
No, and Patrick, it was very similar, his career. Funnily enough, almost in a reverse way to Charles Haley, who was on the 49ers, although Charles Haley did win a Super Bowl with the 49ers before going to Dallas, but then winning with the Dallas Cowboys. And they both played, you know, I think they both won 94 as well, didn't they? DeMarcus Ware was a phenomenal athlete and pass rusher. And I know that, obviously, I know this because I watched so much Broncos stuff, but Von Miller saying, when DeMarcus Ware came in, he showed me all of these things that I had and he'd been in the league for years, 4 years. Miller had been there. DeMarcus Ware comes along and says, you should do this, you should do that, you should do the next thing. And totally up to the game of everyone around them. We talked about quarterbacks last week, you know, improving the play of everyone around them. DeMarcus Ware did that on the defense.
And you can see throughout his career, multiple seasons leading the league in tackles for loss, multiple seasons leading the league in sacks from outside linebacker. You don't see that massively often, so to be able to elevate your teammates whilst maintaining your own levels is very impressive, and it's great to see Jerry Jones not learning any lessons from that and keep letting elite pass rushers out of the building.
Well, listen, the Cowboys have got enough players on our list already. I'm just saying. Lauren Callahan will be listening or watching this going, shut up. No, they don't. Add another 6. But DeMarcus Ware was phenomenal. He really was. Jake McGee, who's the next guy on our list?
Yes, we have someone close to my heart. We have Ricky Jackson, a 6-time Pro Bowler, a Super Bowl champion because he did the right thing at the end of his career and got himself a ring. 1,173 tackles, 128 sacks. He had 8 interceptions, but forced 40 fumbles. The man knew how to punch that ball out. Part of the Dome Patrol, and like I said, at the end of his career, went to the 49ers, which was a pretty smart move to do in the the mid-90s, and got himself a ring as well. But I'm glad that someone on the Dome Patrol got in.
Yeah, Patrick, I mean, the Dome Patrol in New Orleans, arguably the greatest linebacking core of all time. 4 Pro Bowlers in one season. Four linebackers, 4 Pro Bowlers. Ricky Jackson, what do you think of it?
Yeah, it looks like, despite the fact he won his ring elsewhere, his best period in his career was that first kind of 6 years in New Orleans. And Pro Bowls, All-Pro teams, 100-plus tackle seasons. The resume is there to match the majority of the people we looked at in the shortlist for this list. So fair play to him for getting in. I think it was well deserved.
Yeah, and Jake, you won't remember this, but I do. I remember watching that Super Bowl 29. It was the 49ers against the Chargers, the Stan Humphries-led Chargers. Huh? But yeah, they made the Super Bowl. And there was it's a famous shot of Ricky Jackson talking to an official near the end of the game. Right, the 49ers are up by 20 points, whatever it is. And you see him talking to an official, and they're kind of laughing and joking with each other. And I think it's Al Michaels was the commentator saying, there's Ricky Jackson telling, I think it was Jerry McBride, says how big of a bonus he's getting after this game. Because he signed for the veteran minimum for the 49ers. But if they won the Super Bowl, he was getting like $1 million, which at the time, back in 1994, was a big bonus. And he was like, hey, check me out, I'm getting $1 million bonus because we won this game. He was a phenomenal player. He really was. And I can confidently say that over the next couple of years, as we keep adding to this Hall of Fame list, we'll see at least one or two more of the Dome Patrol in there, in the Hall of Fame, because that was an outstanding class. Patrick Jackson, who is the next guy on our list?
So for the final outside linebacker we're inducting, we have a guy who spent 16 years in Baltimore with a retirement tour, taking him to Arizona and Kansas City in his final season. It's Terrell Suggs. He had 1 All-Pro appearance, 7 Pro Bowls, 2 Super Bowl champions. He was the Defensive Player of the Year in 2011, and he also won Defensive Rookie of the Year in 2003. Phenomenal career, 139 sacks, league-leading 202 tackles for loss. A guy, the longevity helps that number, but you can't argue with the disruption that he caused throughout his career. He was a constant threat.
Yeah, Jake, Terrell Suggs. I mean, just another one of those guys that you think, as soon as you hear the name, you think, oh my God, he was terrifying. He was just so dominant for his time, and he was huge. He looked like the biggest outside linebacker you have ever seen in your life when he was playing. Just a dominant player. And again, and I know I sound like a scratch record, but an absolutely worthy member of the WINFL Hall of Fame.
Yeah, and I'm sure an answer to a pub quiz question that everyone would get wrong in terms of most career tackles for loss with 202. There's so many great players in the defense. Terrell Suggs probably isn't the first name that comes to your mind when you think most career tackles for loss, but he did it. And, if there was an award going in college in 2002, the man got it. And then similar to Strahan, where he had a great career, but there was one particular year in the NFL that he was fantastic in the 2011. I just talked about Ricky Jackson knowing how to force fumbles. Well,
yeah.
Suggs was 1 behind him with 39, so the man also knew how to punch the ball out.
He certainly did. And that wraps up our linebackers, our entire linebacking core. We then move into the defensive backfield. We're talking cornerbacks. Now, the first guy on our list played 17 seasons in the NFL, made 11 Pro Bowls, 6-time All-Pro, Super Bowl champion, 1993 Defensive Player of the Year, all 1990s team. It's Mr. Rod Woodson. Played for the Steelers, played for the Ravens, played 238 games. He had 71 interceptions in his career and 12 pick sixes, which is an all-time record. He also threw in with 13 and a half sacks. He had 18 forced fumbles, but he switched to safety in 1999. What he'd felt himself, this was a voluntary move by Rod Woodson, which I only found out recently. He felt he'd lost half a step in speed. Trying to keep up with these receivers, it's difficult off the line of scrimmage. And it was essentially a voluntary move to safety to get the cushion. And he was a Pro Bowl safety. This guy is just one of the greatest defensive backs of all time. Jake McGee, Rod Woodson was my absolute number 1 cornerback. If I was picking an all-time team, Rod Woodson is the first cornerback I'm taking. And just a phenomenal player. What do you make of this guy's career?
Yeah, I just had to check my list to make sure I agreed with you, and he was first on my list as well. Most career interceptions returned for a touchdown with 12. Most total defensive touchdowns, 13, tied with Darren Sharper and Charles Woodson. And like I say, when you can notice and kind of self-scout yourself and say, you know what, I might not have that's the first step anymore, but I reckon I can still play the game. He went out on his own terms, but he first said, "Let me try a different position," and hey, I'm pretty good at this as well. So, kudos to him to self scout and think I've still got something to give, but maybe in a different position.
Yeah, and Patrick, we'll actually talk about this later on with cornerbacks switching to safeties, because this was towards the end of Rod Woodson's career, and he was like, I've seen someone else do this before. I reckon I can do it. But he didn't look like a prototypical cornerback. He was big, and he wore the big shoulder pads. And when you think of football in the 1990s and what a defensive player looked like, Rod Woodson stands up there, and just one of the most intelligent players to ever do it. There's a reason this guy has so many accolades that he does, and there's a reason that he's the first person on our list, Patrick Jackson.
Yeah, I think he had an exceptional career, and it's not often you see cornerbacks hitting the 100 solo tackle marks. He managed that 1,050 throughout his career, as well as the league leading pick six mark. Which if your league in a category as important as that, you're Hall of Fame worthy without the rest of it. But he has the rest of it. If you're still making all pro teams when you're 37 as a defensive back, you're elite. There's no other way to put it.
Yeah, absolutely. Rod Woodson, just one of the greatest to ever lace them up. We'll move on. Jake McGee, who is our next cornerback in the Hall of Fame?
Yeah, we've got Dick Night Train Lane, a 7-time Pro Bowler, a 3-time All-Pro, a member of the All 1950s decade team. He was a 2-time interception leader, most interceptions in a season with 14. Reminder, back in the 50s when they weren't playing 17, 18 games. 68 total interceptions, 11 fumbles recovered, 7 touchdowns. Added in a safety as well, and a remarkable career where he basically just turned up and asked for a tryout. He wasn't a star coming out of college. He wasn't a first overall pick. He just kind of rocked up and said, I reckon I can do this. This looks pretty easy, and a pretty good decision by the Rams to let him try out, I think.
Yeah, and Patrick Jackson, he's also generally considered to be one of the hardest hitting cornerbacks of all time. One of the hardest tacklers ever. He was just a phenomenon. He was so beyond anyone in his era that it just wasn't even funny. And worthy addition to the Hall of Fame. Night Train Lane, Patrick Jackson.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the coolest nicknames in sport as well. His name has stood the test of time, and that's because of his play. You could see that on the field. So yeah, a worthy inductee, absolutely.
We then move on to our next. I was muted there for a second. We then move on to our next induction. Patrick Jackson, who have you got?
Yeah, 2-club man this time. 11 years with the Raiders, 7 years with Green Bay. The Raiders split 8-3 either side of the Green Bay stint. It's Charles Woodson. He was a Super Bowl champion, made 3 All-Pro teams and 9 Pro Bowls. He's in the All 2000s team. 2009 Defensive Player of the Year, 1998 Defensive Rookie of the Year. Just all-round talent for, well, I mean, it's spanning 3 decades, isn't it? It's a huge career. 65 career interceptions, nearly 1,000 tackles, 997 solo tackles. We'll give him 1,000. We can round that up. But he was a guy who really was key to those teams that he was in. He was a great contact.
Yeah, Jake, Patrick Jackson doing the old Top Gear maths there for the amount of tackles that he had. You remember the old Top Gear maths. You remember that. It was 196 miles an hour. That's basically 200 miles an hour. But yeah, I mean, Jake, Charles Woodson was phenomenal and so dominant. But again, another guy who a lot of people forget about as being one of the greatest to ever play his position. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, a great pick by the Raiders, and he ended his career as a Raider. But those 6 years with the Packers were just phenomenal. And we've talked about quite a few Packers over the Hall of Fame videos because they were so dominant. And the fact that he only played 6 years for them and is in their Hall of Fame should speak volumes. I mean, most consecutive seasons with an interception returned for a touchdown because he did it 6 times, all with the Packers, 2006 to 2011. I mean, just unstoppable, and you just don't throw that way, do you?
No, and we probably should point out that quite often when you talk about great cornerbacks, great defensive backs, it's not always about the interceptions. I know it's kind of sexy to think about interceptions, like, oh, this guy had 193 interceptions. Like, oh, that's great. Doesn't mean he was a great defensive back. And with no offense to our, Tim Durbin, Lorne Callahan, the Dallas Cowboys fans in here. But when, was it Deron Bland? I think it was, led the league in interceptions or pick six, whoever it was.
Diggs, wasn't
it? Yeah. Sorry, beg your pardon, Diggs. Also gave up like 40 touchdowns. So it doesn't mean you're a good cornerback. Beg your pardon.
The Jameis Winston of quarterbacks.
Yeah, exactly. Jameis Winston of cornerbacks. Loads of interceptions, gave up loads of touchdowns. Sometimes that happens. It's not always about the stats. And this was the thing when I spoke earlier on about the stats for defensive players. When you've got guys who don't have an awful lot of interceptions, or, they don't have a lot of even... You can argue, like, there's some pass rushers out there that say, they don't have a lot of sacks. Well, they can't be that good of a pass rusher. Well, when you're getting triple teamed on every single play, and you're still getting, second or third in the league in sacks, yeah, you are. You're doing pretty well for yourself. Charles Woodson was just absolutely phenomenal. We're going to move on. 17 seasons, minus 3 that retired, and then came back again. So he played 14 seasons, 8 Pro Bowls, 6 All-Pros, 2-time Super Bowl champion. It's Deion Sanders. He was a 1994 Defensive Player of the Year, made the All-1990s team. He had 188 games played, 53 interceptions, 9 pick sixes, 1 sack. Let's not forget about that. And 10 forced fumbles. Of course, I mean, you could argue about putting Deion in on special teams. You could argue that. But the guy was one of the greatest cornerbacks of all time. And yes, his interception numbers isn't that high because teams stopped throwing at him. And it's something you need. I mean, I remember the season he played with the Cowboys. I don't think anyone threw at Deion when he was on the... I think he just like, what? There's no one throwing at me? No one at all. If they did throw, he was picking it off and taking it for a touchdown. Deion was one of the greatest defensive backs we have ever seen. Revolutionized the game. Don't need to talk about him coaching his son. That's all good. Jake McGee, Deion Sanders just was an absolute phenomenon when he was in the league. Prime time. Why didn't you tell us all about it?
Yeah, Coach Prime Time. He's got some cool nicknames. Mentioned Woodson, only 6 years with the Packers and in their Hall of Fame, only 4 years with the Falcons and in their Ring of Honor. Like I say, people didn't throw his way because he was such a playmaker. So those years on the Cowboys, he said, I'll be Travis Hunter before Travis Hunter even is thought of, and I'll play a bit of wide receiver. I'll play a bit of corner. Put me on punt returns, kick returns. I'll do anything to just get the ball in my hand. I mean, he was the definition of like a playmaker. You just don't want the ball in his hands. You punt away from him, you kick away from him, you throw away from him.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Patrick, I remember in his rookie season, 1989, I think was it week 1? It was his first kick return or punt return. Deion fumbled it. I think it was against the Rams. He fumbles it. His very first one. And all the fans are like, what? Oh, what's happened? He then picks it up and starts running back 20 yards. And they're losing their mind. The crowd is just going, oh. And then he takes it 80 yards or whatever it was for the score. And all the Atlanta fans are like, oh, actually, do you know what? Maybe he's pretty good. Yeah, there's a reason this guy was a top 5 pick. Deion Sanders is one of the greatest athletes the NFL has ever seen. And he absolutely deserves to be on this list. Patrick, what do you think?
Yeah, a polarizing figure in his time, I think. He's got a lot of self-confidence and a mouth to match, but he backed that up with his play enough that this award is very justified.
It is. Now, Jake McGee, for our next player, we're going to the absolute polar opposite. The absolute polar opposite of Deion Sanders and the persona. Who is the next player on our list?
Yes, we have Champ Bailey, 12-time Pro Bowler, 3-time All-Pro, member of the All 2000s Decade Team. He was an interception leader. He still holds the record for most pass deflections with 203, 52 interceptions, 7 forced fumbles, 6 fumbles recovered, 3 sacks, and 5 touchdowns. And he even gave us the Abe Simpson meme of walking in and walking out with the New Orleans Saints at the back end of his career, but obviously most well known for his time in Denver.
Yeah, Patrick, the Champ Bailey Clinton Portis trade that happened with the Redskins at the time and the Broncos was literally a win-win. Both teams won that trade. But if you can possibly name me your favorite Champ Bailey quote. Yeah, you can't do it. The guy never spoke. I mean, when I said he's the opposite to Deion Sanders, he never spoke. That was it. But of just an incredible player. I watched all of the games that Champ Bailey, well, from when I could, watch with Champ Bailey on the Broncos. And he was just incredible. And another player that teams just were like, no, we're not going to throw at this guy. And he went several games without just ever being targeted. What else can you say about Champ Bailey? One of the best to ever do it.
Yeah, and again, it's the consistency for me. Like, you're still playing into your mid-30s as a corner. It's a really tough gig because the players you're coming up against are so lively, and you've got to use all the nous you've built up over those 14, 15 years to know where to put yourself and how to stay with them. And he was still performing at a high level right up into the kind of 2010s, early 2010s. So fair play to him for that.
Oh, he absolutely was. I remember, I think it was actually the 20, do you know what? It was 2011. It was Tebow time. I remember Tebow time. And there was talk earlier on in the season about players being given Pro Bowl nods through legacy. He's been given a Pro Bowl nod because, he's had 6 Pro Bowls, so he's going to get another one. And there was talk about this. I remember watching a game, and they were saying, oh yeah, like Champ Bailey might be one of those guys who gets a Pro Bowl nod because he used to be really good. And then he just completely shut down every ball that came his way. And the commentator never took that back. I can't remember who the commentator was, but if I ever find you, I'm going to make you eat those words. Eat those words. Champ Bailey was phenomenal. Yeah, he was absolutely incredible. Patrick Jackson, who's the next cornerback on our list?
Yeah, finishing off the cornerback room, the guy who, I must confess, he didn't make my top 10, or really my consideration, slipped through my cracks altogether. We're going back to the Steelers. 14 years of Steelers from 1970 to 1983. It's Mel Blount. I should have looked that up, really. 2 All-Pros. 5 Pro Bowls, 4 Super Bowl champions, all 1980s team, Defensive Player of the Year in 1975. So, a key part of that elite Steelers defense for over a decade, and you can't ask for else from that.
Jake, have you ever had a rule named after you?
No, because I've never been that good at something that they have to change the rules of what I'm doing.
All righty then. Tell us about Mel Blount.
Yeah, when you're so physical and the wide receivers weren't getting, coddled like they are these days, Mel Blount was lighting them up. And that man enjoyed doing it. And the NFL said, we're not going to have much of a sport if we let him keep killing our wide receivers. So they changed the rules of the sport because he was so damn good at what he did. that alone is Hall of Fame worthy. If a rule is put in place to stop how you play the game, you're either doing something incredibly illegal or you're just damn good.
Yeah, this is not like who is the guy in the Raiders? Lester Hayes, who covered his entire body in stickum. So when the ball hit the back of his arm, it was an interception. It's not like that. Mel Blount was just so physical that when the receiver went up, got the ball, and he hit them, the ball, it was incomplete. And he kept doing this, and it was incomplete. And then they essentially made up the roughing the receiver rule, or unnecessary roughness, whatever you want to call it, because of Mel Blount. He was so good. And if you watch highlights, because everyone thinks, oh, he was hitting them, but that's why they made up pass interference. No. That's why they made up the defenseless receiver rule, because Mel Blount was so good at popping the ball out once the receiver caught it. They were like, nobody can catch a ball. Let's change the rules. Just a phenomenal player. Absolutely incredible. And that does indeed wrap up at cornerbacks. So we're going to move on to safeties. First safety on our list won't be a surprise. 14 seasons, 10 Pro Bowls, 6 All-Pros, 4-time Super Bowl champion, Mr. Ronnie Lott. He made the All-1980s team, the All-1990s team. He played 192 games, had 63 interceptions, 5 pick sixes, 8.5 sacks, 22 forced fumbles. Oh, and he was cornerback for the first 5 seasons of his career before moving to safety. And Bill Walsh said, I think you're better as a safety because you're killing these receivers. Oh, okay then. And then he killed even more receivers and running backs and quarterbacks. Ronnie Lott, arguably the hardest hitting defensive back of all time, had the biggest shoulder pads you've ever seen. They were huge. He played a game, Jake, where he had like half of his pinky just like cut off and said, just stick a plaster on it and I'll go back out there and play with 4 fingers. Ronnie Lott was one of the toughest dudes to ever do it. What do you think?
Yeah, a real throwback. When you've got more Pro Bowls than fingers, that's normally a good sign that you're a good footballer or you're dodgy with a saw. Most interceptions returned for a touchdown in a season as a rookie with 3.
I'm sorry, I'm just thinking of Ronnie Lott being a really bad butcher,
But when you're a corner and you're physical, and then a Hall of Fame, one of the best coaches of all time goes, I should give you more of a run-up. You need to be able to hit these guys harder. So I'll move you further back so you've got more time to weigh up how hard you're going to hit the guy. It's a pretty good, this is kind of your dad's favorite defender because he's just a throwback, a physical player.
Oh, absolutely. Now, there was a lot of contention with the safeties, Patrick, because there were so many great safeties and we only had 6 spots, to pick. We picked 10 each. There was loads of names thrown out there, but Ronnie Lott was always up there. He was always going to be our top 6. But he becomes the first guy to pick. And what do you make of it, Patrick?
Yeah, I mean, Ronnie Lott is a guy who people still talk about. He plays like Ronnie Lott when they're talking about hard-hitting safeties. And when your name is the guy that people refer current players to, you made your mark when your career was 35 years ago now. So yeah, you look up at any highlight reel from the late 80s, early 90s, and Ronnie Lott will be remembering somebody in there somewhere.
Oh yeah, when you think of certain guys who didn't make our list, I'm going to just chuck this out here now. Guys like Deron Cherry and Benny Blades and Dennis Smith, who didn't get in there, were compared to Ronnie Lott because that's how good this guy was. Now, these guys didn't make our list, which is not to say that next year they won't or the year after they won't. But Ronnie Lott was just the absolute pinnacle of safety play when it came to what you think of as a safety being, the hard hitting guy who is either fast enough to kill a wide receiver, hard hitting enough, but will also steam straight up the middle to support the linebackers and kill a running back coming up the middle. Ronnie Lott was the absolute epitome of that. We're going to move on. Jake McGee, who is next on our list?
Yes, we have Paul Krause, 8-time Pro Bowler, 3-time All-Pro, an NFL champ, interception leader in his rookie year, and holds the most career interceptions as a safety with 81. Played for the then Washington Redskins, but most notably known for his very long tenure with the Minnesota Vikings.
Yeah, a key cog in that Minnesota D that is looked back on with reverence, and you can see why. And you look at the accolades throughout that career; it's well deserved to be in Hall of Fame contention, I think.
Definitely. And Patrick, who is the next safety on our Hall of Fame list?
Well, we go back to Baltimore, and it's another guy who spent basically all of his career there, apart from a little retirement tour to Houston and New Jersey, to finish it off. It's Ed Reed. Ed Reed had 5 All-Pro appearances and 9 Pro Bowls in his career, as well as the Super Bowl ring. He made the All-2000s team and was 2004 Defensive Player of the Year. So yeah, a great career, including a league-leading 1,590 interception return yards from 64 interceptions throughout his career. He's a long and storied career.
Yeah, Jake, there can be no arguments with when you talk about the greatest safeties of all time. Ed Reed is always going to be in that conversation. And quite rightly so, the man had a long career at a very high level. Ed Reed.
Yeah, and every year when the draft comes up, you look at the safeties and you go, is there anyone even similar to Ed Reed? Because he is just kind of, so, when you try and compare or you try and find a safety, you're trying to find an Ed Reed. And, most career interception return yards, as Patrick mentioned, the longest interception return with 107 yards, the most career postseason interceptions, tied with 9, and the most seasons leading the league in interceptions. Did it 3 times in 2004, 2008, and 2010. So longevity, but also just an absolute demon. And no doubt he was going to be top 3.
Oh, absolutely no doubt whatsoever. So we move on and we come to our next safety, a man very close to my heart. Played 11 seasons, 8 Pro Bowl appearances, 2-time All-Pro, 2-time Super Bowl champ, and made the All-1990s team, known as the Smiling Assassin. Steve Atwater. 167 games played, 24 interceptions, 1 pick six, 5 sacks, 12 forced fumbles. Christian Okoye's worst nightmare for the Nigerian Nightmare. Everybody has seen that play. And if you haven't seen that play, go onto YouTube and look up Christian Okoye, Steve Atwater, and the one where it's a Charlie White, I think, at the time, who was the defensive coordinator for the Denver Broncos, or the defensive backs coach for the Denver Broncos, is talking about that play, and he says, yeah, and we're thinking about the next play. He says, but everyone took time to look up at the screen and see Atwater absolutely obliterate Christian Okoye and just go, oh, yeah, we like that. Atwater, huge part of the reason the Broncos won 2 Super Bowls, drafted in that lauded 1989 draft class. Phenomenal. Atwater was the Broncos' first-round pick. Jake McGee, he was essentially the AFC version of Ronnie Lott on the 49ers at the time. And then when Ronnie Lott came over to the Raiders, the entire AFC was just loaded with safeties. It was disgusting. It really was. But what else can you say about Steve Atwater? He's still involved with the Broncos today. He does a lot of the Broncos radio stuff, and just a phenomenal player.
Yeah, and a cracking nickname. Part of the safety duo with Dennis Smith that were known for just laying the boom.
Oh.
And the fact that, against a kind of rival, you can just completely destroy and kill a myth. And, a player was never the same after that hit. People start to think, okay, this guy who, the Nigerian Nightmare, who no one can stop, all of a sudden has just been made to look very, very human.
Yes, indeed. Patrick Jackson, Steve Atwater, a phenomenal career, a phenomenal player.
Absolutely, and started his career with 5 consecutive 100+ solo tackle seasons, and not even just as well, like 129 to 173. He was really racking up the work, and yeah, you saw him making a massive impact in a defense that was strong. It was a very impressive career.
So we then move on to our next safety, Jake McGee. Take it away.
Yes, another man you would be able to pick out of a lineup pretty easy. We've got Troy Polamalu, 8-time Pro Bowler, 4-time All-Pro, a 2-time Super Bowl champ, the 2010 Defensive Player of the Year, part of the All-2000s decade team, had 32 interceptions, 12 sacks, 14 forced fumbles, 5 touchdowns with 107 pass deflections, luscious hair, but loved to perfectly timely snap and jumping over the line of scrimmage. If you've watched any highlights of kind of the late 2000s, early 2010s, you've seen Troy Polamalu just jump in the center and getting, to the running back before the running back's even been handed the ball.
Yeah, Patrick, Troy Polamalu's probably sitting there over the past couple of years watching the NFL and going, I don't understand why you guys find it so difficult to stop the tush-push. Just jump over the line and sack the quarterback before he, as he's getting the snap. What's so difficult about that? He was phenomenal at it. I've never seen anyone time snaps like Polamalu. Patrick Jackson.
Survived the Madden curse, which is obviously the biggest one in his career, but he was such a, I don't know, I think Jake said it right. He was a guy who was really visible on the pitch when he was out there, really recognisable. And that, plus his really dynamic style of play, helps elevate him to this status. And those Pro Bowl accolades are well deserved.
Oh, absolutely. And Patrick, why don't you finish us off with our final defensive nomination into the Hall of Fame?
Absolutely. Our final guy had 13 years in Philadelphia and then 3 years in Denver. So it's a long 16-year career for Mr. Brian Dawkins. 4 All-Pros and 9 Pro Bowls in that time. 2008 Alan Page Award and the All-2000s team. I think his career was a long one, and he was a really instrumental part of the defenses of those two teams, I thought. And just an overall strong career, and it's that longevity that really brings him in here.
Yeah, Jake, not much you can say about Brian Dawkins, just Weapon X.
Yeah, you kind of took that. That was what I was going to lead with, Weapon X. But a man who has incredibly long list of quotes and scary quotes where you're just thinking this man is maybe a psychopath. He enjoys hurting people. He enjoys intimidating people. And it was because he was very damn good at it.
Oh, it's just, I mean, the guys we missed off this list for safeties, it's like its own Hall of Fame. So it's a shame we had to narrow this down to 6. But every one of these guys absolutely deserve to be in there. That wraps up our Defensive Hall of Fame induction. So I will go through every single player who was inducted. We start with the defensive tackles with Joe Green, Alan Page, Randy White, Merlin Olsen, Bob Lilly, and Warren Sapp. We move to defensive end. Reggie White, Bruce Smith, Deacon Jones, Michael Strahan, Julius Peppers, and Chris Dolman. Inside linebackers are Dick Butkus, Mike Singletary, Derek Brooks, Jack Lambert, Ray Nitschke, Randy Gradishar. Outside linebackers Lawrence Taylor, Kevin Green, Derek Thomas, DeMarcus Ware, Ricky Jackson, Terrell Suggs. And for cornerback, first cornerback, Rod Woodson, Nitrain Lane, Charles Woodson, Deion Sanders, Champ Bailey, and Mel Blunt. And for safety, Ronnie Lott, Paul Krause, Ed Reed, Steve Atwater, Troy Polamalu, and Brian Dawkins. Gentlemen, pretty good Defensive Hall of Fame class. Next week, we're going to have a special teams class and coaches class. So we'll be lumping them in, special teams players and a Hall of Fame coaches. This is almost the end of our show, our podcast, but we do have time for one final segment. And it is, of course,
Random Stats.
Random Stats. Who would like to go first for a random stat this week?
Shall I take it? Because I promised this one last week's show.
Okay.
So, last week you mentioned Matt Ditka, tight end, offensive rookie of the year. And I wondered how often that's happened over the course of time, because it can't be that common that someone gets it. So I went back through the offensive rookie of the years that are listed, and for the majority of the time, it's the AP, for which about 60% have been running backs, 20% quarterbacks, and 20% wide receivers over the last 50 years or so. And it's interesting that the quarterbacks are very front-loaded. So you go back to Ben Roethlisberger, there's 11 quarterbacks on the list. And then there's a big gap back to Dennis Shaw for the 12th quarterback on the list. So there's obviously a big period of time where rookie quarterbacks weren't starting as much, I guess, so they weren't getting the offensive rookie of the year nods. But I didn't see any tight ends. So I had to go digging a little bit deeper. And if you go to the Professional Football Writers Association Offensive Rookie of the Year, 1973, a tight end called Young won it, playing for the Eagles. And in 1992, they gave it to a kicker, Jason Hanson of Detroit. Then there's the Mike Ditka one that you mentioned back in 61. That was Sporting News Offensive Rookie of the Year. And they've given it to a kicker, Chester Markle, in 72. And two other tight ends, Robert Avolt of St. Louis and Keith Jackson, who was also an Eagle in 1988.
Oh.
So there we go. There's a few, but not many, and none in the kind of main Offensive Player of the Year award as it is now.
Keith Jackson was phenomenal. I remember Keith. He played wore number 88 for that Eagles team. That was the same Eagles team with Randall Cunningham. And he had Keith Byers, number 41. Was he a fullback? I can't remember if he was a fullback, but he was a massive hulking brute. But Keith Jackson was one of those tight ends who essentially paved the way for guys like Shannon Sharp and Tony Gonzalez. If you've never seen Keith Jackson play, check this guy out. I think he moved to Miami later in his career. He was brilliant. If you've not seen him play, watch Keith Jackson. It's all I'm going to say. It's a fantastic random stat. Jake, would you like to go next?
I certainly can. And we're talking a lot about classes, and when we're looking at the Hall of Fame, a lot of defensive rookies and people that came into the league straight away. So I looked back, not as far as Patrick, I looked back to last year, and the most different rookie starters in 2025. It shouldn't surprise you when I told you that the Browns had a great draft class. They started 10 rookies in 2025. The Titans at second started 9. The Packers and the Chiefs and the Jets all started 8. The Chargers, Bucks, Saints, and the Dolphins all started 7. Now, the fewest rookies started in 2025. They tied 29th. You have the Steelers, Broncos, and Lions with just 3 rookies starting. And coming in 32, should not surprise anyone, we have F them picks themselves, the Rams, who started 1 rookie.
Fantastic. I love it. Okay, my random stat. This is for Andrew. Because I know, Jake, you and I both know that Andrew was a little bit... Jake, how could you possibly forget about Dan Marino?
Yeah. He wasn't angry at me. He was just
disappointed.
disappointed.
No, he was disappointed, which in some ways is worse.
It is.
In some ways it's worse. So, Andrew, if you're listening, and indeed for any Miami Dolphins fans, this one's for you. On week 4 of the 1988 regular season, Dan Marino was sacked 4 times. That will be the last time that he would be sacked in a game until week 8 of the 1989 season. a run of 19 games, during which he attempted 759 passes. Both of those, the 19 games and the 759 pass attempts, are by far and away a record. It's like it's never even been approached by anyone. And that is my very short but sweet Miami Dolphins and, of course, Dan Marino random stat.
Beautiful.
A member of the WINFL Hall of Fame, and rightly so, Dan.
Yes. Dan Marino, if you're listening, hey, what's the chances you reckon we could get Dan Marino on this podcast? 0 or -5?
I'm going to skip that podcast, I think. I think it's for the best.
God, Jeff, you don't think I'm not going to bring that up? I absolutely will. Yeah, so yeah, Dan Marino, I see, I'm not having to go to Jake. I'm not having to go to you. I know he just literally slipped your mind. It happens to the best of us. I know that you know Dan Marino is one of the greatest of all time. We know this. Andrew, behave yourself, okay? Jake wasn't having a pop at your quarterback. But people who didn't see Dan Marino play, because everyone talks about, the quick release, like Dan Marino. But if you didn't watch that quick release, it was insane. It was like, snap, ball's gone. Like, the receivers only had like half a second to get downfield, and that ball was out of there. That's why he didn't take so many sacks. Because you look at that and say, wow, Dan Marino must have had the greatest offensive line of all time not to give up a sack in 19 games. No, she really didn't. She really, really didn't. He was just that good of a quarterback. And that's my random stat. Gentlemen, I believe that ends our podcast. I think we're done here. So, a huge thank you to Mr. Jake McGee. Thank you very much.
Always a pleasure.
Big thank you to Patrick Jackson. Thank you, Patrick.
It's been fun.
It has been fun. A massive thank you to everybody listening and indeed watching at home. You can find us on Spotify. You can find us on wherever you get your podcasts. As well as, of course, YouTube and X, Twitter at The WINFL Show. Thank you very much for tuning in. We will see you next week's edition of The WINFL Show.
And we're clear.